I am convinced that it is easier to find Jesus through the fog of sin than it is to find Jesus through the fog of religiosity. Oftentimes, the fog caused by sin will hit a point that you know that you need to change, just because of the way your life is going. But the fog of religiosity convinces you that you're just fine. There's no need to change because you're religious. Maybe even what some people would call very religious. So what is this fog of religiosity? Is it even a real thing? Yeah, it's a real thing, and it's addressed multiple times in the Bible. Let's take a look at it for a few minutes. Fog is just water particles suspended in air. How bad could that be? Well, I learned a little bit about fog one winter when my family and I lived in Bakersfield, California. They have something from time to time that's called Thule fog, T-U-L-E, Thule fog. It shows up when conditions are right in the California Central Valley, especially in the southern end of the valley where Bakersfield's located. They canceled school for 3 straight days because of fog. The fog was too thick for the school buses to run. I kid you not, you could sit in your car at a normal stoplight and have absolutely no idea that there was even a stoplight in front of you on the other side of the intersection. Not only could you not see the poles, you couldn't even see a hint of the lights. No red, no yellow, no green, nothing. When the Thule fog gets thick, visibility can drop to less than 10 feet, less than the length of one car. You can imagine what the Thule fog does to the traffic. And the interstate literally becomes a death trap. But we're not talking about physical fog today. We're talking about spiritual fog. We usually talk about the fog of sin, how the lies you tell or the wrongs you've committed and the sinful lifestyle you lead all piles up in your life such that you can't see life realistically. All these sins combine to cloud your vision. But there's another fog that can cloud our vision, and that's the fog of religiosity. What does that look like? Well, I want to start by looking at a few words from Jesus on this topic. Look what he says to the Pharisees in Matthew 23:23. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe mint and dill and cumin, but you have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. He's telling them that their intense focus on their religious rules and practices was creating a fog in front of them that kept them from doing the things that are of most importance. And Matthew 23 has 6 other examples of the Pharisees putting their religiosity ahead of the things that really matter. You should read that chapter for yourself. And look what Jesus says in Mark 7:1 through 13. The summary is that he told them, you've made your traditions into doctrine. In other words, you've let your religious practices outweigh the actual message of the gospel. Your religiosity is creating a fog in front of you to keep you from seeing what really matters. And read Revelation chapters 2 and 3. Notice how often Jesus tells these churches that they aren't what they think they are, that they've got caught up in their religious practices and forgotten what really matters. Blinded by the fog of religiosity. And Luke records for us in Acts 17, a time when Paul came across this same thing. Paul encounters these people and says, Men of Athens, I perceive in every way that you are very religious. He calls them very religious people. Not just religious people, but very religious. And then he proceeds to tell them they don't know the truth. He tells them about God and calls on them to repent. He calls on a group of very religious people to repent. They couldn't see God or Jesus because their various religiosities were fogging their vision of the truth. And finally, let's go back to some prophetic, and I might say frightening words from Jesus, found in Matthew 7, verse 22 and 23. Once again, we hear Jesus speaking about religious people that weren't focused on the right things. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name? And then I'll declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. These were religious people, people that were doing religious church stuff. But Jesus says, depart from me, I never knew you. Could it be that all this religious activity, their religiosity, was creating a fog that kept them from getting to know Jesus? Well, apparently so. Now, I debated on whether to list a bunch of things that our churches get focused on that may be causing a fog of religiosity to form in front of us. And I finally decided not to do that. I could list a bunch of things, likely including a number of things your church does. And then you could get defensive, explaining why every one of those things is a good thing. One by one, scratching them off the list. Explaining about how your church has done those things forever. One by one, they could all be explained away. But you see, focusing on each one of these things, one at a time, one after the other, is a part of the fog of religiosity. So focused on defending all our traditions and practices and processes and priorities and programs and on and on and on, that we actually create a fog of religiosity that keeps us from seeing justice and mercy and faithfulness and Jesus. So I'll leave it to you to do some self-examination. What are those things that may be creating a fog of religiosity in your life? So, that's the question we need to each ask ourselves. Is my religiosity creating a fog in my life such that I'm missing the things that really matter? Could I be one of those people, like in Matthew 7, that tell Jesus all the great religious things I did in my life, only to hear Jesus say, depart from me, I never knew you? The fog of religiosity is real, and it's dangerous. Jesus spoke to this topic time and time again. Isn't it ironic that your religiosity could be the thing that destroys your soul? The older I get, the more I realize I have to be constantly on guard against becoming a religious person that doesn't know Jesus. So I'm convinced that it is easier to find Jesus through the fog of sin than it is to find Jesus through the fog of religiosity. Oftentimes, the fog caused by sin hits a point that you just know you have to change, just because of the way things are going. But the fog of religiosity convinces you that you're just fine, just like the examples we looked at. There's no need to change because you're religious. Maybe even what the Apostle Paul would call very religious. But all that religiosity can actually create a fog that prevents you from seeing Jesus. A fog that gets in the way of getting to know Jesus. A fog that puts you at risk of Jesus saying to you one day, "Depart from me, I never knew you." I hope these thoughts may in some way be helpful to you, helpful to clear the fog so that you can really see and know Jesus. Thanks for listening. God bless you on your journey.